You look for its fly.
Helps if I turn it on. There we go. It helps if I turn it on. Good evening. We have some announcements this evening, and then we'll get started. We're going to be looking in 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 20. Topic of David tonight is David, the warrior of God. So we looked at him last week as the shepherd, and he certainly was a shepherd because God had anointed him because he was a man after God's own heart. Tonight we're going to look at him as the warrior. 1 Samuel 17, we'll be looking at his encounter with Goliath. Mostly we'll be looking at his response to the rest of the children of Israel's fear of Goliath in spite of God's presence with them. So don't forget a couple of announcements. First of all, don't forget that the last week of the food drive is this week, so at least for now. So we'll take a break at least through the first of the year. They still are running short of food, though, so after the first year, I'm going to call Jimmy and see where they're at. So they need the shipment that we have, so they're taking that up tomorrow. So we've got a load over in the room we've accumulated over the last couple of weeks we're taking up tomorrow. And then we'll take this and see how much we get next week, and we'll either store it or help somebody out. We do have a couple people we know that are in need for Christmas, so we'll try to help them out as well. So don't forget to bring food in this week. It is spaghetti and sauce, canned fruit, or canned vegetables. Next week, don't forget, the only service we're having on Christmas Eve is the 7 p.m. service, not 6. If you get here at 6, you'll probably be the only one here. So at 7 o'clock, we're having Christmas Eve service. It'll be our traditional candle lighting service, carols, a short message, and the lighting of our Advent wreath. So all of that will be at 7 p.m. next week. It's hard to believe next Wednesday is Christmas Eve, but it is. Another year is almost over. Redemption Road's first family forum will be the 28th after the AM service. So December 28th after the AM service will be the family forum. First one for Redemption Road. And then there are tags on the tree in the back. So this is a new announcement. There are tags on the tree for presents that have to be back in by no later than Sunday morning. The chaplain at the local jail asked us if we could help out with some kids who weren't going to have any Christmas, and he called around to several churches, and he did get a few finally. Most of the churches said no, but he did get some to say yes, and so we volunteered. We took on 6 kids. The kids get 4 presents each, so what we did was we just wrote out a slip, 24 slips, so you only have to buy one present for one child if you take a slip off the tree. So we had 24 to start with. I think we're down to 10 or 12. I counted earlier and it was 12, but I think maybe somebody took a couple more, but I'm not sure. So on your way out, if you would stop by the tree just through the double doors to the right and check that out if you're interested, and take 1 or 2 or however many you want until they're all gone. They just have to be gift wrapped and brought back in by no later than Sunday. Now, there are some instructions that are very important. And I also have little slips of paper out there on the round black table next to the tree that has this list on it. So you don't have to remember these. I'm just going to read through them real quick. And don't forget to pick up one of those slips, because we do have to organize this, and we have to organize it pretty quickly on Sunday because the gifts are going to be given away after the service on Sunday morning. Please only get new items. The Sheriff's Department asked us to make sure you buy new items for the kids. Please have them wrapped. You can either put them in a bag or gift wrap them. Add a blank gift tag. So those little tags you put on your gifts to say to and from, just put a blank one on there. Attach the tag that you take off of the tree to the bottom of the present. That way we know what's in there and we don't have to open it up. If you don't put that tag on the bottom of the present, we're not going to know which child it's for or what it is. So please do that. Don't forget to put that tag on the bottom of the present, and return the gift no later than Sunday morning. So we're going to have some visitors Sunday morning. Some of the families are coming to get the gifts after the service is over, so make them feel welcome. And we also are going to be delivering one after in the afternoon. So if you'd like to deliver, I do need a couple of men to volunteer to deliver. Just come and see me after the service. I'll be back there by the tree after the service is over. If you have any questions about what I just said, ask me, and I will try to clarify anything that might be confusing. I have been told I'm a terrible instruction giver, and it's probably very true, which is why we printed papers back there. That way, again, you don't have to remember this. Just take one of those papers off that table with you, and it has those 5 instructions on it. So again, we're going by the guidelines that the chaplain has established for this. They've vetted everyone that's in this program, so it's a program to help people who are just having a difficult time. And so it's run through the sheriff's department by the chaplain, and we get to talk to them about anything we want. So if we want to share Christ with them, we're free to share Christ, which of course we will. We're also free to give them anything as far as literature goes, to invite them to our church. But make sure you wrap the gifts, so these kids, they're just going to take them home with them, put them under the tree for Christmas. So that's all the announcements I have. Again, I'll be back there if you have any questions about that, and we can try to help some families out this year. Let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. So if you have your Bibles, grab them, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. I think we'll start, we're definitely going to start with verse 21. We're going to read a lot of verses. I'm going to read a couple pretty good chunks of Scripture on the slides to start with, then we're going to talk about that a little bit. You will not need your study notes until the very end, and I will tell you when we get to that point, so you don't have to be trying to figure out what goes in what blank over the next little bit. We won't get to that until probably close to the very end, like 10 or 15 minutes from the end. Those are all concluding points and how this basic truth that we're going to study first applies to us. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 21, Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. So basically, if you want an image of what's going on, there is a little like ravine type area between the two armies. The Philistines are on one side, the children of Israel on the other, and those areas in which they're lined up are slightly elevated from the lower area. So the lower area has become sort of a no man's land. Nobody goes in to that area. They just stay on their high area on each side waiting for the other to attack. Because in those days, warfare in particular, there was a great advantage in holding the high ground. So neither one wanted to lose the high ground. No one wanted to go into that ravine and then have to charge up the hill on the other side. So this is sort of a standoff. They have kind of arrayed themselves opposite of each other. They've been yelling insults at each other, and we'll see that in a moment. That actually is true. And they have just been there. So they've all put their camps up on the other side of the hill they're on, and they are just basically at a standstill. Now David has been sent to take some supplies to his brothers who are in the army. And when David arrives, it tells us what happens next. He left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. So what's really ironic about this story, it seems like this had been a daily occurrence that had been going on for a while. They would get up in the morning, they would do whatever they did, and then they would go out and line up. And both sides were doing the same thing. And then they would just dare the other side to attack. You know, they were basically, again, hurling these insults at each other. And also, it was a daily occurrence that the champion of the Philistines, a man by the name of Goliath, would walk down into that no man's land and challenge anyone from the Israelite side to come down and face him in one-on-one combat. And of course, no one had taken up that challenge yet. Everyone was actually terrified of Goliath. He was a giant. He had been a warrior since he was young. He was well known and feared. Verse 23, so as David has arrived at the battle line, having left his animals with the baggage keepers, he was talking with them, talking to the men in the battle line, and behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. Now, that references back, and what he's doing is he comes up into that middle area, and he begins to hurl insults at the children of Israel. And he begins to throw out that challenge, send your best, and have your best warrior come down and face me in combat. And he's also mocking God and mocking God's people. When all the men of Israel saw the man, so here's how they respond. When they saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. So this whole battle line begins to back up as this one man enters into the sort of no man's land between the two battle lines. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? So these men that David had been talking to, they look at David and they say, have you seen this guy yet? He's a giant. Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. So this is what, again, the men in the line say to David. Basically, if you've seen this guy, he's huge. Everybody's terrified of him. And they say that as they're all backing away from him. The whole battle line is beginning to fall back. And David is listening to this, and he looks around, he sees Goliath, just like the rest of them do. And he also then hears some of the men say, and they've probably been talking about this for a while, trying to work up some courage or convince someone to go out and face this man. They said, well, the king would probably make the man who kills Goliath rich and even let him marry into the royal family. So you could marry one of the king's daughters and become instantly wealthy. If you went down and faced Goliath and were successful against him in combat. So David hears this. David's listening. He's watching. He takes all this in, and then he speaks. So beginning of verse 26, then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? So he wants to make sure he heard this right. So he asked them, can you clarify what you just said? And so we don't know if they answered or not. It just kind of leaves that there because David continues to talk. But he just basically asked the question, you guys serious? Has the king promised to make the man who kills Goliath rich and let him marry into the royal family? Because this is the way David sees Goliath, not the way they see him. He sees Goliath in a completely different way. He sees Goliath through the eyes of faith. They see Goliath through the eyes of man, and all that a man can see is how large he is and how frightening he is. All they can think of is how many people he's already killed. David doesn't even quantify that. He doesn't even consider how many men Goliath may have killed. He doesn't really spend a lot of time looking at him from a physical perspective. I'm sure he looks at him and recognizes his tremendous size. But he looks at him like this, and listen to what he says next. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? The people answered him in accord with this word. So they all answered at the same time in the same way. Thus it will be done for the man who kills him. So they're answering that question that he started with. Is it true that the king would make a man rich and let him marry into the royal family if he killed Goliath? And they said, yes. Now again, David is looking at Goliath not the way they do. He looks at Goliath as a blasphemer. He said, who is this that taunts the armies of the living God? Who is this that has the nerve to mock God and his people? So David's not intimidated. That's one of the things that should jump out right away. Everyone else is intimidated. David is not. Everyone else is terrified. He isn't. He's not intimidated or terrified of the power, might, and stature of Goliath, because there's no denying how powerful he is. He has a great reputation for combat. He's certainly large. Everybody can see that. In fact, I think referring to him as a giant is a pretty accurate description. But David's not intimidated, and he sees everything that they see. He just doesn't look at it the same way they do. And he is actually offended and somewhat angered by Goliath's mockery of God and his people. Now, David's older brother's there, Eliab. So now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And so he hears the questions David is asking. And he gets angry. It tells Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, why have you come down? So basically, why have you come down from tending the flocks? Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. So David is looking at this the right way. He is upset by this man's blasphemy. He's not intimidated by his size. He's asking, I think, a really legitimate question. Is what you guys are saying, is it true? Will the king reward a man who slays this giant? Now, Eliab gets upset. He hears David asking this question, and there's a little bit to him being upset. He also knows that David has been anointed to be the next king of Israel, and he hasn't. He's remembering, and I'm sure it's upsetting him, even as he looks at David, that he got to go by Samuel first, and he was the first one rejected. And then they bring in his little runt brother David, and David gets anointed by the prophet and the priest, because Samuel was both prophet and priest. He gets anointed by the prophet of God and the priest of God to be the next king of Israel. And so he's stung by that. He's still wounded over that. And here's this same David now walking up and down the battle line of Israel asking, if a man kills the giant, will he truly receive a great reward from the king? And so rather than, looking at his brother and being kind or gentle or anything, he begins to insult him. He begins to challenge his intentions. And he says, you're just insolent and wicked. Well, that's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? You're insolent and wicked. You're not here for the right reasons. You're not here because you are angry over his blasphemy. You're not here because you are a man of God. You're here because you're wicked. You just came down to watch people die. That's what he's saying at the end. For you have come down in order to see the battle. You just came down to be entertained at the expense of others. So others are going to suffer, others are going to be hurt, and many are going to die, and you're just going to sit here and watch. That's what you actually came for. And that's not what David came for. Again, that is an unfounded accusation where he claims to be able to know what's in David's heart and mind. And trust me, brothers and sisters, we don't know what's in the heart and mind of anyone. Some people that we will attribute noble intentions to aren't very noble, and some people that we attribute evil intentions to aren't evil in their intentions. The only thing that we can see are the only things we can judge. We can see fruit, and we can determine whether or not fruit is good or bad. And that's it. That's as far as we can go. Only God judges the heart and the mind, because only God knows the heart and the mind. So his brother way oversteps his bounds, mostly because he's upset, angry, and probably extremely jealous of David's calling and anointing that was offered to him first in his view, but he was passed over because he didn't measure up to God's standard, whereas David did. He didn't measure up to what God was looking for, but David did. So the insult is thrown at David. David responds, verse 29, "What have I done now?" Do you think there's been a little bit of conflict between Eliab and David? Well, that question is pretty clear, right? What have I done now? That's coming from someone who has been corrected multiple times by someone else. We used to say that to our mom all the time, me and my brother. What do we do now? And really what we were trying to figure out is what we had done that she had found out about. Because if she said we had done something, there were usually 10 to 15 different things she could be referring to, depending on the day and the situation. So we just always wanted to know what she actually knew about before we confessed anything. So David has clearly been confronted by Eliab a few times over various things, maybe some accurate, some not. And he just says, what have I done now? I mean, what is wrong about this? Was it not just a question? Well, and again, what's wrong with asking that question? And the answer is nothing. There's nothing wrong with asking that question. I mean, as a young man, he's curious. And it seems like, as quickly as they all answered, and the fact that they all answered in unison, that they had all been asking this question, and they had all been having this conversation. What do you think the king, or what has the king promised to do if a man kills Goliath? And this is something that had been running throughout the camp. Probably because Saul had probably made this promise. And we don't know that 100%, but I think it's a pretty educated guess that Saul had made this promise because Saul didn't want to fight Goliath. He didn't want to send Jonathan out to fight Goliath. He was looking, though, for someone who would actually have the courage to go out and at least face Goliath and hopefully die nobly. I don't think he believes for a moment that he has anyone in his camp that is able to beat Goliath one-on-one. But Saul has no doubt made this promise, or at least has said something along this line, and it has run its course through the camp so that everybody's aware of this. So he says, again, what's wrong with this? And then he just ignores his brother. It says, then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing. And the people answered and said the same thing as before. So he ignores Eliab. He clarifies once again with another group of people, is this what the king has said? And they all answered yes. They said that's exactly what will happen for the man who is able to overcome this Philistine. So, when the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul. So this is how God moves. David is really, even though he's been anointed, as far as other people are concerned, he's still just a child. He's not important. He's not a person of influence or power or position. He comes from a moderate home, probably middle class if we were looking for a modern day reference. So he's nobody exceptional. Nobody really knows his name. The king certainly doesn't know his name. But because he keeps asking this question, they can tell that he's thinking about it. He's thinking about facing the giant. And some people begin to move off the battle line and go talk to the king about it. And so Saul actually sends for him. Now again, that's something that God orchestrates, because most of the time the king's going to hear, hey, there's a kid out there talking about what you would give to the man who killed Goliath. He's going to chuckle and move on. But this is more important, isn't it? This is David, and God has a plan for David's life. And so Saul sends for David, and David comes into the king, and David speaks to the king. He says, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. That's faith. He knows how big Goliath is, and he knows how little he is. He knows that Goliath has killed a lot of men. He's never killed a man before, although he has killed a lion and a bear, which is pretty impressive, but he's never killed another man. He certainly hasn't killed another man in combat. I don't believe David's even been in combat before, so he doesn't even know what it's like. And yet, because his faith in God is so strong, he's thoroughly convinced that Goliath doesn't have a chance, because he's not going to just be fighting David. He knows, David knows, deep down in his heart and in his mind, by the way, that when he goes out to face Goliath, he's not going alone. So when Goliath fights him, he's going to be fighting David and who? God. Because David is going to go out with the Lord, and the Lord is going to fight for him. So David is thoroughly convinced that this giant is about to die. And he's willing to be God's instrument if God will use him. And he's convinced that God wants to use him, so he's ready to go. And he makes it clear to Saul, I go out and kill him. I'm your servant. I'll go out and kill him because, well, it's not a problem. God's with me. So don't let all these other people who are afraid convince you that this giant can't be killed. He can be killed, and I will do it. Again, you see the faith. You see the dramatic difference between the way David looks at situations and all the rest of Israel does. All the rest of Israel, every single man in that battle line looks at Goliath and sees a foe they cannot defeat. They see a foe that if they go out and face him, they believe with all their faith, this is where their faith is, they believe that he will kill them, that they will not have a chance. And so they all have cowered in fear over and over again, day after day. He has come out and he's hurled this challenge at them, and they have all backed away in fear because they lack faith. Their fear flows out of their lack of faith. So then Saul said to David, and again, he looks at David, he thinks the same thing everybody else does. He sees a child, an adolescent probably in our vernacular, but still someone who's not quite a man yet. You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. So Goliath was your age once, but he isn't your age anymore, and he's been killing people since he was your age. And he's a lot older than you now. You don't have a chance. So, and again, he gives the reasons. 1, he's much bigger than you are. He's much stronger than you are. 2, he's better equipped. This guy has been fighting since he was your age, and he's been fighting a long time. He carries all the best weapons, and he knows how to use them. You don't have any weapons. Saul's looking at him. He doesn't see any weapons. You don't have any weapons. You've never been in combat. You have no experience, and you're really small compared to Goliath. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. So David begins to explain to Saul why he's not afraid. Now, what's interesting, he's going to tell a story, and at first you think he's blowing his own horn, so to speak. He's puffing himself up in the eyes of the king, but he's not, and you'll see that when we get to the end. And really, this is a man of faith in action. He is talking about what God has done through him and what God has done for him, and more importantly, what God has enabled him to do. And this is where his faith really shines through. David believes that he can do great things, but the only reason he can do great things is because God is with him. And he's thoroughly convinced of that. But as long as God is with him, he can do things that people would never imagine that he would be able to do. So this king who cannot imagine this child going out and facing Goliath and surviving, much less slaying the giant, he wants this king to know, hey, I've already faced a lion and a bear. I mean, how much harder do you think it's going to be to kill Goliath than it was to kill a bear? About the same, right? Or a lion, for that matter. I think Goliath might actually be a step down than killing a lion or a bear. But anyway, that's what he begins telling. You think at first, well, he's just trying to puff himself up. But listen to what he says. He's talking about a lion and a bear came in, and he was watching the sheep, and they each one in turn, not at the same time, but each one, when it happened, took a sheep. Or they tried to take a sheep. And he said, I went out after him and attacked him, talking about the lion and the bear. So they had actually snuck in, grabbed one of the lambs, carried it off, and this child chased a bear and a lion and attacked them. So obviously he's not afraid of people or animals that are bigger than him and more powerful than him. And he said, not only did I attack them, but I rescued this lamb, from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Talking about the bear. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. So I've done both. I've killed a lion and then I killed a bear, or vice versa. They took a lamb out of the flock. I pursued them. I attacked them, and then I slayed them. So your servant has killed both a lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. So he's not going to be any different than that. And here's the reason. Listen to what he says the reason. Since he has taunted the armies of the living God, because in taunting the children of Israel and the armies of God, he is in essence mocking God. And David knows that that's an affront to God, that God is angry about that. And David believes, again, coming back to faith, he believes with all of his heart, just as God gave him the power and the ability to defeat a lion and a bear, God is going to give him the power and the ability to defeat this giant. So again, you see the difference, the faith in action versus the fear that is driving the unfaithful. And David said, the Lord who delivered me, and here's where you get where this is all really going. He's not puffing himself up. He's reminding Saul of how great their God is. Listen to what he's trying to do here. The king, guess who else is hiding from Goliath? King Saul. Where's he at in all this? Has he ever went out and faced this giant? Has he ever went out and said, hey, I'll accept your challenge. I'll come down and fight you in this low area between the two mountains? No, he's been hiding back in his tent. The battle array is out there. You never see Saul mentioned. When the people tell Saul about what David has been saying, he calls him off the battle line to come back to where he is. He's back in the rear. He's hiding out. He's terrified of Goliath. And so David is being used by God to tell Saul, why are you so afraid? If you just believed in me and realized who you serve, you wouldn't be afraid of this giant. So David said, the Lord who delivered me, again, who delivered him? Not himself. God did. God's the one who delivered him and empowered him to kill the lion and the bear. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Wow. So David is saying this to Saul. You would think Saul, being the king of Israel, and having been the king of Israel for a while, having experienced some of God's amazing power in his own life, you would think at this moment he would kind of wake up and realize that this giant is about to die, because God is about to deliver him into the hands of whoever goes down into that valley. And you'd think he would want to be the one to lead his people and go down and face this giant who's been mocking them and mocking God. But no, he looks at this child in front of him who he looked at physically only, and that's still looking at him only physically, because clearly nothing's kicking in spiritually here. He's still looking at David physically, and rather than do the right thing and be the king and go do the hard thing himself, he instead sends this child to go down and do it. How sad is that? I mean, how sad is that he sends a child to go down and do what he's supposed to go do? And so instead of going down and doing, that's how terrified he is. That's how unfaithful he is. He doesn't believe that God's going to go with him. And maybe Saul's right. Maybe God's not going to go with him. Maybe he goes down and faces Goliath and he gets killed. He wasn't a very good king, was he? And he certainly was not a man of faith. But David, because he's a man of faith, he knows God's with him. God's been with him with the lion, and God was with him with the bear, and now God's going to be with him with the giant. And so he's willing to go. Saul says, go ahead. Good luck. Good luck, buddy. I don't think you're going to survive this, but maybe God will be with you. Good luck. Go on down there and you face him. And then this whole charade, I call it, that goes on after that, where Saul tries to look like some sort of caring king. You know, where Saul clothed David, very next 38 says Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them, which means he had never tried out armor before. And guess what happened? He couldn't walk because the armor was too big. I said it kind of reminds you if you've ever... one day I came in and Logan was probably about 7 or 8, and Logan had decided to put my suit on, my Sunday suit. So he had the dress pants, the big white shirt, and the jacket on. The shirt was down to his knees because he couldn't get it tucked into his pants, so it was down to his knees. The pants, he was walking on them, and they were like 3 inches out in front of his toes. And then the jacket, it just wouldn't stay on. It kept falling off, and he kept pulling it back up, and the jacket was hanging that far down past his little fingers. And I came in, I said, "What are you doing, buddy?" He said, "I want to be like you." I'm like, "Well, you can be like me, but I don't think you can wear that suit." I wonder if David looked a little bit like that, thinking he's probably 13 or 14 at this point, and he just put on a full-sized man's armor, because Saul was a big guy. If you read the description of Saul, for an Israelite, he was a big guy. And so Saul puts his armor on David, and David can't even walk in it. It's so heavy and so big. And David said, I can't do this. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." And David took them off. It's a kind way of saying, I'm too small to wear these. I'm not strong enough to bear the weight of this armor and be able to actually go out into the field and face this giant. So David takes them off. It was kind of one of those ways that Saul is trying to look like a benevolent king by giving him his own armor. But David's too small. He can't wear that armor. It's too large for him. And he doesn't really need it, because armor is not going to deliver David. God is. So we get to verse 40, and here's David getting ready to go to battle. He took his stick in his hand, which would be his shepherd's rod, not the staff, but the rod. The staff was more to pull the sheep back. The rod was used to defend the sheep from the wolves. So he's taking the large rod stick that he would have carried as a shepherd. He's going to take that. That's not going to be very effective against Goliath's sword. But he's going to take it, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. And so he puts them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So all David does to get ready is he picks up his shepherd's, the rod that he carries, the large stick. He grabs his sling, and he selects 5 smooth stones from the river. And that's all he needs. And he's being practical about this. He has to take something into combat. He's going to take the things that he's accustomed to using, things that he's actually good with. So David realizes he's pretty good with a sling. He knows how to use it. He does pick 5 rocks just in case he needs an extra one. Again, nothing unfaithful about that. It's just being practical. This is a big guy. He may need a couple rocks to take him down. We don't know how he killed the lion and the bear, but there's a good chance he killed the lion and the bear with the sling, since he's pretty good at using it. And we were talking this morning, and I told him when we were growing up, my dad made the mistake of buying me and my brother, you remember the old slingshots that had the wrist piece that went over here, and then your hand went up through 2 metal bars and then had a metal hook in it, and you would hold the grip arm, and you could pull that dude way back. It had these big yellow rubber bands. You remember those? And we used to use those. We'd go down and we'd shoot mice or rats down at the tobacco barn. We'd also shoot snakes off the bridge with them. And we'd either use a wad of gravel, because we had pretty big pouches on them. We'd use wads of gravel for the snakes, and we'd use ball bearings, my grandpa would bring us, to kill the rats at the tobacco barn. And man, I'll tell you what, my arm oftentimes was bruised from that little overlap piece, because we would just sit down there and do that for a whole afternoon. And we got pretty good at hitting things. You can actually, but this was not that kind of sling. This was more one that you whirled over your head, and then you let go of one end, and the rock would sling out. It's far more powerful than the things we were using. But we could kill rats and snakes with what we were using. So you could probably kill a bear or a lion or a man if you knew where to hit them with this thing. But it would be extremely hard to hit that right spot. But David seems to, by the empowerment of God, been able to do that in moments of crisis with very large animals, and eventually here, a very large person. So again, just a sling, just a rod, and God. What else do you need? You got your 5 rocks, you got your sling, you got your rod, you got God with you. You don't need anything else. And that's exactly how David thinks. Just the bare minimum and God. And the bare minimum will be more than enough. And so he approaches the Philistine, and that's what he does. Verse 45 it kind of gives the contrast. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me." And how did Goliath come? Well, he came fully equipped, right? He came with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, the choice weapons of his day. On top of that, he's fully armored. He's got his full armor on. His armor fits. It was made for him. And so this giant of a man, completely armored up, comes bringing the weapons of the day, all in extra large sizes, sword, spear, and javelin. In fact, his sword's so big, David could barely pick it up after he hits him in the head with a stone. So he comes out to face David. He's fully equipped, ready to go, the mightiest warrior of his day. David says, you come to me with all these things, but guess what? I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. So he says, here's the contrast. You come to me with all the stuff of the day. You come to me with everything people think you need to be victorious. You have your skill, you have your size, you have the best weapons, you have your armor. Everything is top-notch, the very best of the best. But you know what? It isn't going to matter, because I actually came with the best. The best is God. Your weapons are second-rate. Your weapons, your armor, your training, your size, it's not going to matter, because you are about to face God himself. Not in David, but David is just an instrument. He's just someone that God is going to use. And that's what faith does. Faith realizes it's not about us, it's about him. Faith recognizes that God is the one who delivers and empowers. And so it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you have. You can have just a sling and face someone who's fully armed, and it'll all be fine, because God will deliver and God will empower. The one here who doesn't have a chance is not David, it is Goliath. From the moment David walked out by faith to face him, Goliath was doomed to death. He doesn't have a chance. And everybody watching from the Israelite side, I am telling you 100% of the men up there, probably his brother too, thinking, I'm finally going to get rid of that little guy. They're everyone thinking David's about to die. He doesn't have a chance. But David knows, because he believes and he trusts. That's what faith is. And so he's waiting on God to deliver and empower. And God, of course, is going to, and that's what happens. David goes out there, and you know the rest of the story. I don't have to read it. David goes out there, and by the power of God, he slays Goliath, pulls Goliath's sword out, and finishes him off. And it's simply a sling and a stone, but a stone guided by God. All right, so how does this apply to us today? So now you're going to need your little notes if you want to follow along. Well, we're in a war too, not a war like this. We're not necessarily in a physical confrontation. We're in a spiritual confrontation. In 1 Timothy 1:18, this command I entrust you, Timothy, my son, in accordance with the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight. And so Paul was writing Timothy, and he's reminding them that just like David, we're in a fight. It's just not physical. So there was a physical element to David's fight with Goliath. But really, if you break it down, the real war was spiritual. It was an issue of whether or not David would believe and trust God. The rest of Israel flunked. They did not believe in God, and they did not trust him. David did. Paul is telling Timothy, you're in a spiritual war. The question is, will you fight the good fight? Will you trust God? Will you believe him? In Ephesians 6:12, Paul was inspired by the Spirit to kind of define this for us. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. That is the war we're in. Sometimes, even in our lifetimes, and we're seeing this more and more, that warfare even becomes physical at times. And the enemies that are arrayed against us through physical eyes look exceptionally intimidating. But looked at through the eyes of faith, we will see our enemies the same way David saw Goliath. They are simply giants waiting to be vanquished through faith. So let's fill in some blanks. How can we win? What is the objective here? And what can we garner from David's life that would help us, especially his faith? First of all, number one, warriors of God are not intimidated. They're not intimidated, and that's the word for the blank. They're not intimidated by the power, might, and stature of their opponents. So it doesn't matter how large the giant, how well equipped the giant, doesn't matter. What matters is God is on our side. So therefore, we're not intimidated. We are realistic. We're going to recognize challenges. We're going to recognize how big the giant is. We'd be foolish not to, but we're not going to be intimidated by it. Our enemy may be formidable, but our God is always going to be greater. We will stop being intimidated when we start viewing things from a heavenly perspective. And that's how David does. That's what you see from the beginning as we looked at these verses this evening. David doesn't look at Goliath the way the rest of the people do. He sees something different. All he sees is a blasphemer. Basically, what David sees is a man who, in his pride and arrogance, has mocked God, and in essence, because of that, has become a dead man walking. He doesn't see Goliath as a legitimate threat to himself. He sees Goliath as under a legitimate threat from God. He has messed with God, and there is a price to pay for that. And so David is not intimidated by this, and he looks at this from a heavenly perspective. Number two, warriors of God are offended and angered when the devil mocks God. And other people for that matter, not just the devil, but the devil is always behind a mockery of God. So warriors of God are offended and angered when the devil mocks God. You see this in David, right? You'll see this in people of faith. They believe in the holiness of God. They believe in the glory of God. And there's just something in them that gets upset. It's just something rises up in you when someone takes the Lord's name in vain or mocks God in some humorous way, they think, where they're making a joke and saying something foolish about God. It's just offensive. And David was offended by it. He was offended by the way in which Goliath acted. And also, he's a little upset that nobody in Israel is really as offended as they should be. He doesn't understand why other people are not offended. And he doesn't understand why they're all terrified of this man who is a total blasphemer. Number three, warriors of God often wonder why no one else is doing anything. I mean, David is looking around, and he's going to do something himself, but I think his initial reaction, and you see this when he's asking these questions over and over again, and I think this is what his brother picks up on as the other part of why he gets so upset. He can't understand why nobody hasn't killed this man already. He really doesn't. I mean, the way he looks at things is totally different. And he looks at the men lined up and he's like, what? Why hasn't anybody went down and silenced this man? Why isn't anyone taking this challenge and went down by the power of God and slayed him? He is mocking you, but more importantly, he is mocking God. And you all are just standing there in fear, looking for someone else to go down and do it. And he's like, why? So I think warriors of God often find themselves wondering why nobody's doing anything, why no one will take up any challenge, why no one will step out on faith. But warriors of God will, and that's the big part. Warriors of God view it as their solemn duty to defend the name of God. It is a solemn duty, by the way. God has called us to defend His name. Also, in our era, He has commanded us, because He entrusted it to us, He commanded us to protect and defend the purity of the gospel message, because He entrusted that to His church. And that's all of us. We are all entrusted with the purity of the gospel. So it's a solemn duty to defend the name of God. Warriors of God do not shrink into the shadows when God's name is defiled. And that's why I think David is so shocked that nobody has stepped up yet. It's never even a thought that enters his mind. He's not going to shrink into the shadows. He's not going to walk away and let this go undealt with. He's going to deal with it. He's going to go down. He's going to face this giant. If nobody else is going to do it, he's definitely going to go down and face this giant. Number 5, warriors of God are called by God, anointed by God, and empowered by God. So warriors of God are called. David was called, and he was anointed. We know that he was anointed. We looked at that last week, where God sent Samuel to anoint him as the next king. But more importantly than that, not just is he anointed as king and called to be king, but he's also clearly called to be a man of faith. God has recognized his trust and belief, and God has called him into use. So God is going to use those who put their faith in him, who trust him and believe in him. And so David is that man, so God has called him into something, and not yet king, but he's going to be king. But right now, he's going to face a giant. So he was called, anointed, and empowered. And we'll see, if you look at the rest of the story, I don't have time tonight, but if you read on down, I'm sure you're familiar with the story, David does slay Goliath. And so he did that through the empowerment of God, not through the power of his little youthful body. He was successful because God empowered him to be successful. Number 6, warriors of God fight in the power of God. So again, David clearly fought in the power of God, not in his own power or strength. And that's what faith does. Faith recognizes personal weakness. It recognizes our own limitations, but also then looks up and recognizes God is not weak at all, and God has no limitations. So again, what do we have to fear? And the answer is nothing, except, and by the way, always remember this, there is a caveat to that answer. The only one you are to fear is God. And finally, warriors of God are unstoppable, and they are. Warriors of God are unstoppable. What's the worst thing you can do to a warrior of God who's put all their faith and trust in Jesus? Kill them? Whew, you just sent them to heaven. Wow, what a serious punishment you just inflicted on that follower of Christ, right? So, again, what's the worst? There's nothing you can do. They are unstoppable. And people say, well, we stopped them, we killed them. What? You sent them to heaven. Think about it for a second. You didn't stop anything. Their time came to an end, and God let them come home. You didn't win nothing. You didn't win anything. Warriors of God, the men and women who put their faith and trust in Him and follow Him wherever He leads, they are unstoppable. The only thing that stops a child of God is a lack of faith. That's the bottom line. You have to look at life that way. It's a lack of faith. And so we need to be the warriors of God. And we need to be fighting the fights God wants us to fight, like protecting the gospel, defending the Word of God, doing the right things. And it's hard to do the right things. I know it's hard. That's why it takes faith. It takes faith because you have to believe that God's going to deliver and God's going to empower. Boy, it's tough, isn't it? And don't be afraid to do a little logistics like David did. David prepared. He got his rod. He got his sling. He got 5 stones. Do what God expects you to do. Don't be foolish and just say, God, I'm not going to worry about it. No, do the things God tells you to do. There's a reason He tells you to do them, because He wants to know if you trust Him and you'll actually obey Him. Because not only does God look for trust, He looks for trust that's actually verified through obedience. A lot of people say they trust God, but they don't obey God. And if you don't obey God, really, do you trust Him? Not really. And you certainly don't love Him, because Jesus said, if you love me, you do what? Keep my commandment. That's why David's a man after God's own heart. He trusts God, he believes God, he obeys God. All that's faith in action. All right, we'll close there. We'll do prayer requests, and then we'll close in prayer.